As a salaried church organist, choir master, and instructor of choir boys, Mozart was as outrageously overqualified as J.S. Bach had been in the same sort of job in his day, and his total immersion in composing when he wasn't otherwise occupied must have been both an escape route from the humdrum social life, remember his contempt for the Salzburg musicians, and an almost desperate determination to follow the one true vocation for which he felt he'd been put on this earth. But he was always a man of the theatre, and Salzburg's lack of adequate facilities grated on his nerves. It was a matter of great excitement, then, when he received a commission to write a new opera for Munich. The result was his first undoubted operatic masterpiece, Idomeneo, but though it was well received at its opening, it proved too advanced for Munich's audiences and closed after only 2 performances. More disappointing still for Mozart was the lack of interest shown by the Elector, despite having praised the opera to all and sundry after attending one of the rehearsals. The Archbishop hadn't bothered to come to Munich for his employees' opera, but had taken up temporary residence in Vienna, where he now required Mozart's attendance. To the Archbishop's understandable annoyance, Mozart lost no opportunity to promote himself and cultivate useful contacts. Among these was the powerfully influential Countess Thun. As Mozart reported to Leopold,
"I've had lunch with her twice already, and hardly a day goes by without my calling on her. She is quite the most charming and lovable lady I have ever had the honour to know, and she regards me with the very highest favour."
It certainly made a change from lunching at the Archbishop's.
There we eat, as a rule, around noon. Rather too early for me, but what can one do? Our group consists of the 2 valets, the Archbishop's private messenger, the confectioner, 2 cooks, and my insignificant self. The 2 valets have their place at the top of the table, but at least I have the great privilege of being seated above the cooks.
Despite attempts by the Archbishop to block him, Mozart became well acquainted with the Viennese musical establishment and gave 1 or 2 high-profile concerts, which became the talk of the town. He also discovered, to his delight, that the Webers were now living in Vienna. Aloysia was now married and expecting her first child, but they met again as friends, the rebuff at Munich being thankfully forgotten. Old Fridolin had died, and his widow now lived with Aloysia's 3 unmarried sisters, one of whom, Constanze, was to become Mozart's wife. This happy reunion, his new acquaintance with members of the aristocracy, and the warmth of his reception by the Viennese public all brought to a head Mozart's long-simmering frustration, to put it mildly, with his situation in Salzburg.
3 times already this arch-booby has said the most insulting and disrespectful things to my face, which I shall not repeat, as I wish to spare your feelings. And it was only because I always had you, my dear father, before my eyes, that I didn't take my revenge right then and there. He called me a knave, and a dissolute cad, and other insulting names, and told me to take myself off. And then it all came out, as in a single breath, that I was the most dissipated fellow he knew. No man had ever served him so badly, and he threatened to write home and stop my salary if I didn't remove myself forthwith. It was impossible for me to get in a single syllable, for his words blazed away like a fire. He called me a scoundrel, a villain, a rogue, and other such delicate bouquets. Finally I could restrain myself no longer, and I said, "Your Grace is not satisfied with me?" "How dare you threaten me, you miserable, dim-witted little louse?" he replied. "There is the door, and I tell you I shall have nothing more to do with such scum." At last I said, "Nor I with you." "Then be off," says he. "Scram! Get out of my sight." Before I was quite out of the room, I retorted, "That's it. This is the end. You shall have it in writing in the morning."
But it wasn't the end. Not quite. There was another ugly scene, this time with the Archbishop's chamberlain, in which Mozart was literally booted out of the room with a kick on his backside. Technically speaking, however, he hadn't been fired. He'd resigned. On the 8th of June, 1781, at the age of 25, he felt himself free for the first time in his life. Leopold, however, was predictably appalled and demanded that Mozart retract his words and beg for reinstatement. After all, Leopold had done it, and successfully. Mozart was incredulous.
You say the only way I can preserve my honour is to go back on my resolve? How can you possibly perpetrate such a suggestion? Everyone knows my honour was insulted. Are you seriously proposing that I represent myself as a cowardly worm, and the Archbishop a worthy prince? You say, unbelievably, that as I have never shown you the slightest affection, the moment has now come for me to do so. Can this really be you? And then to suggest that I would never think of sacrificing any of my pleasures for the sake of my father? What pleasures do you think I have here? Do you seriously believe that I am revelling in pleasures and amusements? Dearest and most beloved father, I beg of you, do not ask me to recant. Ask of me anything, but not that. Anything but that. The mere thought of it makes me tremble with fury.
Well, he didn't recant, of course. Whatever the risks, and he knew them, he was free. Free to be the arbiter of his own fate, or so it seemed to him then. But the challenges facing him were enormous. In leaving the Archbishop and striking out on his own, he became the first great composer to abandon servitude in favour of the freelance life. Happily, things went well for him at once. He was busy, playing concerts, composing, teaching, and Vienna's most important music publisher, Artraria, agreed to publish his compositions. But his happiness bordered on rapture when he received a major commission for a new opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio, within weeks of his liberation from the servants' kitchen. On Christmas Eve, in the presence of the Emperor, he had his famous pianistic duel with the Italian composer-pianist Muzio Clementi. One of the greatest and most influential virtuosos in pianistic history, Clementi led off with his Sonata in B-flat, opus 24, number 2, whose opening Mozart later pinched for his Magic Flute overture. So much for Clementi. Mozart then weighed in with an improvisation and a set of variations. Well, when Mozart and Clementi finally retired to their respective corners, the emperor pronounced his verdict, one of the great cop-out lines in musical history.
Clementi has only art. Mozart has art and taste.